Hey everybody, it is Thursday, October 10th, 10/10. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. You guys are all 10s in my book. I'm Moshe Winunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Jill, today is World Mental Health Day.
Moshe, a reminder today and always that it is really important to take care of your mental health. I find going for a walk and some fresh air usually helps me.
And of course, if you need help, go seek a professional. There's nothing wrong with that, and it can be incredibly helpful depending on where you're at. So we're thinking about all of you today on World Mental Health Day.
All right, Moshe, let's get to the news. Hurricane Milton makes landfall overnight after 1 million people were told to evacuate, and some concerns that it could be one of the most destructive storms in West Florida's history. To the Middle East, President Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu speak for the first time in 2 months as Israel vows retaliation against Iran.
Hello, it's me. Adele might have been writing about the Netanyahu-Biden relationship in her song.
Or Taylor Swift. It's me. Hi, I'm the problem. It's me.
Well, in the
depending on which way you, depending on where you land.
Biden relationship, they might have a disagreement there.
Yep, we've got some of the scoops from Bob Woodward's new book about Biden, Bibi, Trump, Putin, you name it.
Yes, it's an election tradition. Bob Woodward, the acclaimed reporter, has again gotten people to talk who were inside the room for important decisions, and we'll tell you what we've learned so far in the book.
To tech news, could the U.S. force Google to break up its business? The latest on a historic big tech antitrust case. Now to some news about the news. Fallout after a controversial interview on CBS Mornings. And now Shari Redstone, the CEO of Paramount, is weighing in.
Yeah, the boss, the big boss, the boss of bosses weighing in on the bosses. Huge controversy over there at CBS.
Some new numbers out about how many high school kids identify as transgender. And Amazon continues to try to shake up the healthcare industry. Plus, Moshe is on this day in history.
We got trouble with a capital T that rhymes with P that stands for pool. Jill, can you name the musical?
No. I don't even know what you're talking about.
All right. Well, anyway, that's sort of related to what we're talking about. By the way, for those who don't know, that was Music Man.
Oh, okay. I'm not a huge Broadway show person. So,
Jill, I performed in Music Man as a high schooler, so I still get the lyrics in my head.
He's a what? Right. He's a what? He's a music man, and he sells clarinets. Is that it? I feel like I do know that from chorus.
You got that. I'll give you points.
To the kids in the town with the big trombones and the rat-a-tat drums.
All right, so you got some credit there.
All right, so maybe I know more than I think I do.
All right, more on that later in the show. All right, let's get to the big headline here. Hurricane Milton. It made landfall on Wednesday night along the Gulf Coast there in Florida as a Category 3 storm. Officially, the center of the eye crossed into Florida just after 8:30 p.m. Eastern time, bringing powerful winds, deadly storm surge, and flooding to parts of the state. The center of the hurricane's eye officially crossed into the state at Siesta Key. That's in Sarasota County, just south of Tampa there. So while it was not the worst case scenario for Tampa, as many feared, given that storm surge is south of the storm, Tampa still got pummeled there by wind and rain. The National Weather Service issuing a rare flash flood emergency last night for the Tampa Bay area, including the cities of St. Petersburg and Clearwater. At 1.6 inches of rain fell in a single hour. 16 to 20 inches of rain we're talking about over the last 24 hours here in St. Petersburg and some other areas. So still major flood concern there, as well as flood concern in Orlando as you head in state there. Milton reached Category 5 status twice as it made its way across the Gulf of Mexico, eventually making landfall again as a Category 3. But given that it had achieved Category 5 status, it brought with it massive winds, massive storm surge there. Never be fooled by the fact that these storms weaken. Some of them weaken just before landfall. This was the 5th strongest storm the Atlantic Basin has ever recorded, as in the Atlantic Ocean, Gulf of Mexico, Caribbean. The 5th strongest storm again in recorded history there. So it crossed through Florida overnight, making its way to the east coast of Florida. That's where Daytona Beach and some of the towns on the east coast, as Milton was making its way into the Atlantic. A major issue across the state yesterday was also tornadoes. Multiple tornadoes tore across Florida, saw aftermath damage on the West Coast, on the East Coast, Palm Beach Gardens, in the central part of the state. As Milton made its approach, a lot of potential for tornadoes there. In fact, the National Weather Service issued more than 130 tornado warnings, nearly breaking a record, an all-time record there for a single day. And as I mentioned, beyond the tornadoes there, a bunch of rain already. And beyond the tornadoes there, if we go back the past couple of weeks here, this was just the latest punch for Florida, which got hit by Hurricane Helene. Then a bunch of rain has already saturated the state. And then you had the hurricane-force wind gusts, an additional 5 to 10 inches of rain in some places, more than that, especially along the I-4 corridor there that runs from Tampa to Orlando and in the east coast of the state. As of the last check here, just about midnight Eastern time, nearly 2 million people in Florida were without power. A rare time in history also. Disney World closed yesterday. It's expected to be closed again today, along with Universal Studios. You can only count on two hands there the number of times that has happened in history. Again, located in Florida there, which was experiencing record rain, flash flooding. As we wake up this morning, we'll get a sense of the damage here, especially where the storm made landfall there at Siesta Key. That's a barrier island just south of Sarasota. Has a beautiful stretch of sand there overlooking crystal blue waters, considered to be one of the best beaches in the world. And so we will get a sense today as we wake up. And they put helicopters in the air, drones in the air, a sense of the damage there. This has already been one of the worst seasons ever for Florida. This is the 6th year ever with 3 hurricanes hitting the state. And I mentioned we'll get a sense of the aftermath today. The hurricane's power really led to a number of warnings here about the storm surge. We're talking about 9-foot to 13-foot storm surge. That is second-story storm surge there, eclipsing some records that have not been seen in 100-plus years. Was looking at some images overnight from Port Charlotte, from Venice. Again, south from where the storm hit, that's where the storm surge is the worst. North, Tampa area, St. Pete, were the worst winds and rain there. So we're gonna get a sense here of the potential damage. And again, Jill, we've been talking about the storm surge.
Yeah, storm surge is the big concern here. You really see that on the south side of the hurricane. Storm surge is this abnormal rise in water levels during a storm, the result of heavy hurricane winds pushing a bulge of water towards shore as the depths become shallower. While winds are the primary cause of storm surge, it's also affected by a storm's angle of approach, the shape of the ocean floor, and the low pressure within a storm, which slightly aids in that bulging effect. Because of the way the storm surge can quickly inundate coastal locations and then penetrate well inland, it is typically one of the deadliest threats from a hurricane. In the case of Hurricane Milton, the topography of Florida's western coastline along the Gulf of Mexico contributes to the danger, and that's because it is not very deep and it just has this gentle underwater slope.
Yeah, that's why the West Coast here is such a concern. The East Coast of Florida, very different from the West Coast of Florida. That's why this rare direct hit, a storm moving from the west to the east across the Gulf of Mexico, we've only seen that a couple times in recorded history, was such a concern because of the nature of the West Coast of Florida. In recent years, whether it was Charlie, Debbie, Ian, Irma, we've gotten a sense of storm surge and its impact and destruction it can have on the west coast of the state. So we're going to get a sense again today when daylight breaks about how bad the surge was. 10-foot surge again, Siesta Key, Sarasota, Fort Myers. We'll be on the lookout there. We're going to have coverage throughout the day over on the Mo News Instagram account.
Okay, now to the Middle East. President Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had a direct phone call on Wednesday. Vice President Kamala Harris was also on the call. It lasted for about 30 minutes, and it is the first, at least that we know of, between Biden and Netanyahu since August. The White House press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, says that the call was, quote, direct and very productive. She did acknowledge, though, that the two leaders have had disagreements and are open about them. Translation, these two men don't like each other very much.
Not at all.
We'll have a bit more on that a bit later in this podcast. But it comes as the world is waiting to see how Israel's going to respond to Iran's firing of 180 ballistic missiles at Israel directly about a week ago. Israeli's defense minister, Yoav Gallant, has promised an Israeli strike against Iran will be, quote, lethal, precise, and surprising. He said, quote, they will not understand what happened and how it happened. they will see the results.
Mysterious words there, but it comes as you've seen that pager attack and a lot of surprises Israel has had in store for Iran and Iran's proxy groups in recent weeks around the region.
So Israel has reportedly not ruled out striking Iran's nuclear facilities. Biden has said he is not in favor of that. Tehran has said any retaliation would be met with vast destruction, which of course raises fears of an even wider war that could potentially draw on the United States, which is just about the last thing that Biden and Harris want, especially with just a few weeks until the election. The U.S. has reversed course a bit on its stance regarding Israel's war against Hezbollah. Initially, the U.S. was pushing for a ceasefire with Hezbollah, but now says that it does support Israelis' limited campaign against the terrorist group. U.S. officials were reportedly kept in the dark by some of Israel's actions in regard to Hezbollah. That includes Israel's killing of leader Hassan Nasrallah. And as you mentioned, Moshe, the detonation of the pagers and the walkie-talkies that were used by Hezbollah members in Lebanon. Israel, of course, still not confirming or denying that it had anything to do with that.
Yeah, but it's been widely reported that it was them, albeit without a full admission there. Jill, one of the reasons the Israelis will say the U.S. has been kept in the dark here is that everything they tell the U.S. somehow ends up in the media within hours sometimes of them telling it. And so ultimately here, the Israelis not telling the White House much because they're concerned about leaks here. Just one element here of the increasingly difficult relationship here between President Biden, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. Journalist Bob Woodward is out with his latest book. It's called War. It focuses on all things Biden, Trump, the last couple of years here. Bob Woodward, famous from the duo of Woodward and Bernstein that brought down Richard Nixon. Woodward's written like 24 books over the last 40 years here on every president, always has multiple revelations. Jill, we were in D.C. last year where we noticed Bob Woodward at a Christmas party sitting down with members of the U.S. Marine Band in the corner of the party. It was like, oh man, he's totally getting scoops for his next book.
They know everything. They're at every event.
The Marine Band's at every event. So like the rest of us are like, filing through, talking to diplomats, etc. And you look at Woodward and you're like, Woodward, he has these people on speed dial. He's talking to the band to see if he can get any good color for the next book there. I'm not accusing any members of the band there of leaking, but certainly Woodward was making an effort, it looked like.
Yes, you and I were schmoozing and eating, and he was basically writing his new book.
He was writing his new book. He's like, were you there in December? Did you notice what facial expression Joe Biden had? Anyway, the point being, Woodward out with his book. It is a equal opportunity assassin, if you will, when it comes to politics, revealing things about both Democrats and Republicans. The book officially goes on sale next week, but excerpts are already circulating. That's what Woodward does. Certainly it gets leaked to certain newspapers to start to build buzz here. And certainly this book is getting a lot of buzz. In the leaks that are out so far from the book, we learn more about Biden's issues with Netanyahu and Netanyahu's issues with Biden. In the book, Biden has some choice words for Netanyahu. Cover your ears, folks, or if you have kids in the car, fast forward here about 30 seconds. He calls Netanyahu a number of things, accuses the Israeli Prime Minister of having no strategy, calls him an effing liar, says multiple times, Bibi, what the F?
Right. But you're actually using cleaner language than the president.
Biden known for dropping F-bombs left and right. Apparently back in July, Biden shouted at Bibi in a call, Bibi, what the F? After an Israeli airstrike killed a top Hezbollah military commander, and a number of surprises there saying, why don't I know about this stuff? So there's been a lot of back and forth here going to the spring. You have Woodward revealing that in a different phone call, again, this is why these phone calls are infrequent, Biden is on the call with Netanyahu saying, what's your strategy, man? You've got no strategy. Bibi insisting at the time he's got to go into Rafah, that's in southern Gaza. It's only going to be a couple weeks. Biden saying on the phone, it's not going to be a couple weeks. Talk about months here. You've got no strategy, man. And so there's a lot of back and forth here. You have U.S. officials saying, well, Biden's known for using sharp and direct, unfiltered and colorful language about both Netanyahu and other world leaders, among a few revelations there specific to that relationship.
And most of those are certainly not the only revelations in the book. Woodward reports that Donald Trump has spoken to Russian President Vladimir Putin, quote, maybe as many as 7 times since leaving office in 2021. He also says that Trump, while he was in office, sent Putin COVID-19 testing machines for his private use during the height of the pandemic. The Trump campaign is adamantly denying these reports. because they certainly, reignite these allegations of this overly cozy relationship between Trump and Putin.
From the statement from the Trump campaign, Woodward is a, quote, total sleazebag, slow, lethargic, incompetent, and overall a boring person with no personality. I think you could say a lot of things about Bob Woodward. I don't know if I'd call him a boring person with no personality. The man knows a lot. Trump has cooperated with previous Woodward books. He puts people out to Woodward to try to influence the books, but now he doesn't talk to him directly. The cover of the book, by the way, has pictures of Netanyahu, Trump, Harris, Biden, Zelensky, and Putin there. And again, it's sort of equal opportunity here in terms of embarrassing revelations. Interesting, Jill, one of the other anecdotes I caught in the story, a call between George W. Bush and Joe Biden, where apparently Biden is talking about being let down by his intelligence officials. W saying to Biden, oh boy, I understand what you're going through. I got effed by my intel people too, according to someone who was on the call between W and Biden there. So if you're into politics, your international affairs, this will be a compelling read. I'm looking forward to getting my hands on a copy of the book here, given some of the revelations. And again, compelling details here, multiple sources. And Woodward, in those anecdotes about Putin and Trump, also reveals that Trump secretly sent Putin certain COVID tests to help him. And Putin apparently says to Trump, I hope this doesn't get out because this is going to screw you, not me, this revelation. And that apparently Trump would tell people to get out of the room when he picks up the phone to talk to Putin in the last couple of years since he left the White House. So a lot of interesting revelations there in this Bob Woodward book.
Really interesting, Moshe, about George W. Bush. Presumably he's talking about the bad intelligence regarding Saddam Hussein having weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah, the entire predicate for going into the war in Iraq, that's Bush basically saying I was screwed by my intel people, though some would argue the intel people actually knew what was up. It was Dick Cheney and Don Rumsfeld manipulating it. It's a whole separate conversation we can have another day, Jill. But, W, known for his choice language there, saying he was effed by his intel people, which takes me to my favorite W quote from the Trump inauguration, where after the Trump inaugural address in 2017, sorry, he goes, that was some weird shit. I never want to lose an opportunity to quote W with observations on life. W-isms.
Where he was expecting some... Moshe, he's expecting some optimistic,
flowery inauguration speech about how great America is and optimism in the future. And it was like Trump for nearly an hour on doom and gloom. This country's falling apart, blood in the streets. And W says to Hillary Clinton, that was some weird shit.
Thank you, Moshe, for bringing laughter to our days.
I'm here as a documentarian of my favorite presidential quotes from history, Jill.
All right, time for the speed read. Moshe, now to a story about the media and our old stomping ground. Moshe, from the Free Press, an internal fight at CBS News. Shari Redstone, the chair of Paramount Global, which is the parent company of CBS News, said Wednesday that CBS leadership made a, quote, bad mistake with their handling of the aftermath of an interview on the network's morning show. It's called CBS Mornings. It comes as morning co-host Tony Dokoupil is under fire for a contentious interview last week with author Ta-Nehisi Coates. CBS News leadership basically told staff on Monday that the Dokoupil interview, which was focused on the Israel-Palestinian conflict, was not in line with their editorial standards. However, Redstone, whose family is the majority shareholder of the company that owns CBS, disagrees with her own management, saying that she did not think that Dokoupil had violated the network's editorial standards when he grilled Coates over the content of his new book. Okay, so Moshe, for people who are not familiar with this story, let's take a step back and we're going to just walk through this. Last week, CBS journalist, again, Tony Dokoupil, along with Gayle King and Nate Burleson, did an interview with the writer, Ta-Nehisi Coates, about his new book, The Message. And it includes a pretty one-sided view against Israel. It accuses the country of apartheid and saying that it reminds him of the Jim Crow South. So Dokoupil asked him about it, take a listen to a couple of DeCopel's questions.
Ta-Nehisi, I want to dive into the Israel-Palestine section of the book. It's the largest section of the book. And I have to say, when I read the book, I imagine if I took your name out of it, took away the awards and the acclaim, took the cover off the book, the publishing house goes away, the content of that section would not be out of place in the backpack of an extremist. And so then I found myself wondering, why does Ta-Nehisi Coates, who I've known for a long time, read his work for a long time, very talented, smart guy, leave out so much? Why leave out that Israel is surrounded by countries that want to eliminate it? Why leave out that Israel deals with terror groups that want to eliminate it? Why not detail anything of the first and the second intifada, the cafe bombings, the bus bombings, the little kids blown to bits? And is it because you just don't believe that Israel, in any condition, has a right to exist? But if you were to read this book, you would be left wondering, why does any of Israel exist? What a horrific place, committing horrific acts on a daily basis. So I think the question is central and key. If Israel has a right to exist, and if your answer is no, then I guess the question becomes, why do the Palestinians have a right to exist? Why do 20 different Muslim countries?
Jill, that was just a bit of the questioning there from DeCopel, not typical morning show fare, but an attempt by him to try to get at his feeling that Coates here is only presenting one side of the conflict, and so he wanted to challenge him a bit there.
Right, and while some staffers felt that he respectfully challenged a book that has been accused of being one-sided, others at CBS felt that his questioning was out of line. During their weekly network editorial meeting on Monday morning, which happened to take place on October 7th, which in and of itself is an issue for some of the staff, the network's leadership effectively apologized for the interview, saying that the questions did not meet the company's editorial standards. Adrian Rourke, who is in charge of news gathering at the network, quoted extensively from the CBS News Handbook, saying there are times that we fail our audiences and each other. We are in one of those times right now, and it has been growing, and we are at a tipping point. We will still ask tough questions. We will still hold people accountable, but we will do so objectively, which means checking our biases and opinions at the door. Moshe, how do we know word for word what she said? Because despite them saying at the beginning of the call, hey guys, this is confidential, somebody leaked the entire call pretty much to the free press.
Yeah, it sounds like they have a leak issue at CBS, and Jill, I'm familiar with that. I was there for 10 years and dealt with many a leak from my meetings. Always assume, CBS friends, that someone internally is recording those things. Journalists live and die by leaks from other places, and it turns out, at least based on what we know here from the Monday meeting at CBS, that someone internally at CBS was leaking this meeting to the media, and we heard some of the back and forth.
Right, so it led to an internal debate at CBS. Chief legal correspondent Jan Crawford, she pushed back on management on the call, saying, quote, I thought our commitment was to truth. And when someone comes on our air with a one-sided account of a very complex situation, as Coates himself acknowledges that he has, it's my understanding that as journalists, we are obligated to challenge that worldview. Tony prevented a one-sided account from being broadcast on our network that was completely devoid of history or facts. It was civil. Moshe, you spent 10 years at CBS, including as senior producer of that very morning show and running the evening news. What do you make of all of this?
Jill, I have thoughts. I have many, many thoughts about what's taking place over there. I should keep in mind that I left CBS back in 2019, but not surprised, I should say, by what is unfolding there. It does speak to a larger conversation that is happening inside a lot of mainstream media newsrooms right now. We know, we can acknowledge this, that there is not a lot of political diversity in some of these national newsrooms. We've worked in them. They're like 80, 90% liberal, typically. Not much diversity when it comes to thought. And increasingly, whether we're talking about the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, CBS, fights have broken out, especially in recent years when certain stories are not presented with certain liberal ethos. There is the feeling among these places, and they certainly do a good job sometimes, of being nonpartisan, but at times you do see bias. We have talked about it, and it's pretty present. It's one of the reasons why some people have turned to alternate places for their news. So notably, we know what happened inside this meeting because the Free Press reported it What's the Free Press? It's a website started by Barry Weiss, former New York Times staffer. And you could say that several years ago, you would consider her pretty mainstream, center, even center left. She happens to be a lesbian. She has a certain ethos that is pretty liberal on certain viewpoints. But because of the trend line that the media has been going in, she was effectively excommunicated from the New York Times for not being liberal enough. We've talked about some previous firestorms over the New York Times, where they carried an op-ed piece several years ago by Republican Senator Tom Cotton, who was calling for the National Guard to be called in to quell some of the rioting happening around Black Lives Matter. And it's an opinion by a U.S. senator, and that was unacceptable. There was a full-on internal civil war there at the New York Times over the running of an op-ed piece, an opinion piece, by a U.S. senator, by a Republican U.S. senator. So we're getting to the point here, and we've seen on college campuses, and we're seeing it among sort of a newer generation of journalists coming in, where certain viewpoints are viewed as violent themselves, just having that viewpoint. And so this is a trend line I noticed as a manager over at CBS through the teens there back into 2016, 2017, 2018. You started to see this more and more, where we used to have full-on editorial conversations where like, okay, how should we cover this story? What do you think? What do you think? And by 2017, 2018, we started to get some younger staff, and even some older staff, I should say, who was like, well, hold on. Why has that story been rejected? It must be because you are anti-X. And it's like, no, the story wasn't good. Let's come back with a better story. But you start to see this personalization happening. And so increasingly here, you're seeing this trend line, which brings us back to CBS. I should acknowledge, full disclosure here, I was part of the team that helped found that morning show back in 2012. At the time, it was Gayle King, who's still there, Charlie Rose, Norah O'Donnell. It was a place we intended to be a place for smart conversations, grilling lawmakers, getting to the truth. Sometimes as part of getting there, you got to ask challenging questions, provocative questions. And so in this case, though, we're now in the year 2024. Coates is brought in there. Coates is in there doing his book tour, and you saw Tony DeCopel. You've listened to the questions there. Some people felt they were tonally off or slightly more aggressive than you would normally get on a morning show. Now, obviously, those questions, if you listen to podcasts, if you watch cable news, that's par for the course. Morning shows are typically softer fare. So the fact that DeCopel was going with a more challenging angle there is interesting. And apparently for the current management team there, responding to some staff there out of line. And so you saw that they came to management. Management had that meeting. The meeting was leaked. And so there we are. Jill, I should say, as a former producer of that show, my thinking is I watched the segment and it came to an abrupt end there because DeCopel dominates the conversation with a few questions. Then they got to go to commercial. When we were doing the show, when I was on that show, I would have been like, wow, this is really compelling television. Let's hold everybody through the commercial and have them stick around. Now, typically you have what's called a rundown in TV. So they probably had him and they had another segment coming up after the commercial. So they said goodbye. It was sort of abrupt. They didn't quite finish the conversation there. So I was frustrated from a producer viewpoint where I'm like, this is really compelling stuff. Blow out the rest of the show. Let's have Coates back and let's have a robust conversation on all of this because you're getting to some really interesting issues.
It was compelling and it was also informative. And I happen to agree with you. So I didn't watch this segment live and it wasn't even on my radar until this controversy had broken out. So I went back, I watched it on YouTube. I was expecting fireworks. Okay, I thought this was going to be this like really, really contentious thing.
Right. Based on the headlines and the fact that on cable news, you see fireworks.
Right. So instead, I thought it was just this robust discussion, one that was worthy of continuing. And it actually reminded me of the line from Jerry Maguire, where you've got Rod Tidwell, played by Cuba Gooding Jr., who says to Jerry Maguire or Tom Cruise, that's the difference between us. You think we're fighting, and I think that we're finally talking. Which to me, this felt like a really good discussion. And one of the things that Coates admitted in the interview was that part of the reason that he didn't mention anything kind of in defense of Israel was because, to paraphrase him, that viewpoint's already out there, that there's already pro-Israel books, that there are already pro-Israel books.
Yeah, let's actually take a listen to that. I think that the DeCopel questions here got to an interesting answer here. Here's Coates' first response to Tony's first question, which we just played, saying that, the reason why he's presenting his side here is because he already thinks the media is one-sided the other way. Here, take a listen to a bit of how Coates responded.
I am most concerned always with those who don't have a voice, with those who don't have the ability to talk. I have asked repeatedly in my interviews whether there is a single network, mainstream organization in America with a Palestinian American bureau chief or correspondent who actually has a voice to articulate their part of the world. I've been a reporter for 20 years. The reporters of those who believe more sympathetically about Israel and its right to exist don't have a problem getting their voice out.
So, Jill, interesting disclosure there. We'll link to the full conversation in the show notes if you want to take a full listen here. Again, something you might hear on a podcast or cable when cable is good. Not when cable is just a noise fest, a yelling fest. A robust conversation, but getting at the why here, why the book is presented the way it does, why he doesn't mention things like Hamas or Iran or the Palestinian Authority or terrorism to explain what's happening in the region. Coates is in defense of his books here. So, I think there's questions here again, tonally about how DeCopel framed his questions, but again, at an organization that harkens back to Edward R. Murrow and Walter Cronkite in 60 Minutes and asking hard questions, there are people I'm hearing from at CBS who are like, that's our job. And there are people also who are like, I didn't like the way it was presented. It felt too opinionated. Though I will say, Jill, you watch the shows sometimes and you will hear straight up opinions, not even in the form of a question from various hosts. So a lot of consternation there. And now, as we mentioned, Shari Redstone getting in the mix here. She is the controlling shareholder. That's like, for example, think about Amazon. Think about an issue happening at Whole Foods or Amazon Prime Video. And then Jeff Bezos weighing in on management and saying, that's effectively what is happening here with Redstone weighing in on a division of Paramount being like, you guys actually totally screwed that up. And it was totally cool. So how this all unfolds, still unclear here, but an interesting debate happening over there at CBS.
Moshe, you mentioned 60 Minutes, so I just want to mention CBS News also under fire for its 60 Minutes interview with Vice President Kamala Harris. Some viewers noticed that CBS aired different answers from Harris. When 60 Minutes correspondent Bill Whitaker asked her why it seemed like Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu wasn't listening to the United States, there was one version that aired on Face the Nation, and Harris's answer was a bit meandering. Critics have described it as word salad, if you know that expression. The answer that aired on 60 Minutes, though, was shorter. It was a bit more focused. For its part, the Harris campaign says, look, we don't have anything to do with the editing, right? We just sat down for the interview. They told Fox News Digital, we do not control CBS's production decisions and refer those questions to CBS.
So having some background here, I think I know what happened or potentially happened here. 60 Minutes is a black box. They operate on their own. They're literally across the street from the rest of the news division in their own building. They conduct their own interviews. They don't release full transcripts from interviews, even with presidential candidates, which I think, honestly, in this day and age, they totally should. And so I think they put out what they call a teaser segment for the Sunday show. And then as they were editing the Monday night show, the official 60-minute show, they trimmed down that answer and took a different part of the answer there. I don't know that in essence the answer is that different, but still in this day and age, it doesn't look on the level with people. Remember, with all the Biden interviews back in the summer, the demand was you got to do them live and we want the full transcripts, which some of the networks subscribe to. CBS 60 Minutes still does its own thing. It's an issue I dealt with back in 2012. If you want to give a Google 60 Minutes Obama Benghazi. If you want to know the last time there was a controversy there, 60 Minutes was forced to release a transcript the weekend before the election in 2012 because there was the feeling they weren't being on the level there. And it basically showed Obama not calling the attack terrorism initially, even though he was saying so publicly. There was a whole fight with Mitt Romney at the time. Anyway, I would expect, or I would hope, frankly, that CBS does release that transcript with Kamala Harris just so everyone can see the answer for themselves.
All right, now to some tech news from Bloomberg. The Department of Justice is proposing a series of sanctions against Google to ensure that it could no longer monopolize the search engine market. In a filing late Tuesday night, the government laid out its framework for reining in the tech giant. The Justice Department is considering asking a federal judge to force Google to sell off part of its business in what would be a historic breakup of one of the world's biggest tech companies. The judge could order Google to provide access to the underlying data that it uses to build its search results and its artificial intelligence products. The Justice Department, quote, is considering behavioral and structural remedies that would prevent Google from using products like Chrome, Play, and Android to advantage Google search and Google search-related products and features. The 32-page document lays out a framework of potential options for the judge to consider as this case moves to what's called the remedy phase. The agency said that it will provide a fuller proposal on remedies next month and then really start to gather additional documents and evidence from Google for a 2-week remedies hearing in April. And then the judge will rule on the remedies by August of next year.
Yeah, this is going to be a long case. There's no shortage of attorneys that the federal government has. There's no shortage of attorneys that Google has here, or Alphabet, their parent company. We'll see what comes down here, but there's potentially groundbreaking, huge remedies, as they're called, for the alleged monopoly Google has, including an end to the exclusive agreements they have with Apple and Samsung, a prohibition on certain kinds of data tracking. The government wrote here that among the things they're considering is behavioral and structural remedies that will ensure Google cannot use its Chrome browser or Android phone in a way that advantages its search engine. Basically, they're saying between Android, Chrome, its deals, Google locks their control of the market here and doesn't allow any competition in. And that is bad for you, me, and everyone listening to this, the consumer. The effort here mimics the effort 2 decades ago to try to rein in Microsoft. You might say it mimics the effort to rein in AT&T all those years ago, though ironically, decades later, AT&T is now bigger than when the government blew AT&T apart back then in the 1980s. So you got the justice here. So you got the Justice Department here, the Federal Trade Commission here, working on this, realizing that they sort of let big tech get too big, and they're fighting back here. There's a bigger crackdown happening on companies like Amazon, Microsoft, Alphabet here, saying that it's limiting investment. These companies have gotten too large. They've bought up all their competitors. And so ultimately here, we'll see how this ends up. You do have Google criticizing the Justice Department, saying the filing here is radical and has unintended consequences for the consumers, businesses, and American competitiveness. So Google says, we're out for you, the consumer. It's the government that is burning you. And you have the government saying, no, Google, you're bad for the consumer. We're here to protect the consumer. And now the judges have to figure it out.
From NBC News, we're getting the first national data about the number of trans teens in America. According to a survey by the CDC last year, about 3.3% of high school students identify as transgender, and another 2.2% have at some point questioned if they were one. The data was collected as part of the CDC's National 2023 Youth Risk Behavior Survey of more than 20,000 students in public and private high schools in the country. And it provides the first national estimates of trans identity among students. It found that trans and questioning students more often experienced violence, poor mental health, suicidal thoughts, unstable housing, and less school connectedness than their peers who are cisgender, which means that they identify with the sex that they were assigned at birth.
Yeah, so some of the data we're seeing here from this survey, about 1/4 of trans and questioning students attempted suicide in the past year, compared to 11%, 1 out of 10 cisgender female students, and only 5% of cisgender male students. 1 in 10, about 10% of trans students said they had a suicide attempt treated by a doctor or nurse in the past 12 months, compared to 3% of questioning students, and then 2% or less of male and female students there. The CDC saying that the level of distress and the level of experience of stigma and violence is really heartbreaking, and it's something we must address. They are more likely to report being the subject of bullying, consistent with other research on the subject here. So trying to get some firm data here, Jill, on some of the stories or the news issues we've been covering here for a while.
And from CNBC, Amazon plans to bring same-day prescription delivery to 20 more cities next year, marking the latest phase of its push into healthcare. Amazon says that as part of its expansion, it is embedding pharmacies and same-day delivery facilities often clustered around major metro areas. The company announced its plans during a press event at one of its warehouses near Nashville, Tennessee. In March, Amazon introduced same-day pharmacy delivery in New York and LA after launching the service in Indianapolis, Miami, Phoenix, Seattle, and Austin, Texas. Some of the cities that will be added in 2025 include Boston, Dallas, Minneapolis, Philadelphia, and San Diego. The company has worked to accelerate medication deliveries. It's been testing prescription delivery by drone in at least one Texas city. In most cases, the company said when shoppers order same-day delivery of their medication by 4 p.m., they can get it at home by 10 p.m. The prescriptions are offered through Amazon Pharmacy, a section of its website, an app that lets shoppers order medication with free delivery for Prime members. Amazon Pharmacy was launched in 2020, and it was born out of the company's 2018 acquisition of the online pharmacy PillPack.
So the company in January said it had doubled the number of customers it serves in the past year, though it didn't provide a specific number. It does face competition from traditional pharmacies like CVS and Walgreens here, as well as Walmart. Amazon saying this week it's capitalizing on what it calls the care gaps created by the growing number of what they call pharmacy deserts in the US, which can limit a patient's access to medications and pharmacy care. So Amazon are really trying to get out there in underserved areas, among other things, as part of this game plan here. Walgreens and CVS have closed a number of locations across the country. They're trying to maintain profitability. We've been talking about some of the challenges in the pharmacy world here. Amazon's online pharmacy is part of the company's multi-year effort to really break into healthcare here. They've been spending billions trying to get more into healthcare.
Most usually we're not necessarily for big tech getting bigger, but healthcare, definitely one of those areas that could use some disruption.
Use some disruption, though some would say, does it need to come from Amazon? But at the same time, Amazon has scale, right? And has the ability to invest in some of those areas that it would require a startup with a lot of funding to be able to get into. All right, now time for On This Day in History. We begin in the year 1845. The Naval Academy in Annapolis opens on this day with 50 midshipmen students and 7 professors. The goal, to improve what they considered at the time unsatisfactory performance among midshipmen and to really try to grow the quality of the U.S. Navy. We stick in the 19th century here. The billiard ball was patented today by John Wesley Hyatt on this day in 1865. Before Hyatt comes out with a new way to make the cue ball for billiards or pool, hence the clue at the top from Music Man. So Hyatt comes out with a new way to make them out of plastic. Initially, they were made out of ivory from elephant tusks. And so ultimately Hyatt here, starting in 1865, patents the billiard ball made out of plastic in an effort to save thousands of elephants' lives. And going far back here, Jill, if you're curious, you didn't ask, but maybe somebody did. Pool, when was it invented? One would ask. In the 1500s, we found out. It was popular enough actually for Shakespeare to first mention it back in one of his plays in the 1600s. And sticking with activities, fun activities, Pac-Man, the arcade game, was released on this day in 1980 in North America, which brings us to the pop culture segment of On This Day in History. On this day, 58 years ago, give me here, Arian, good vibrations. The Beach Boys are out with their hit, Good Vibrations, on this day in 1966. And Jill, we don't do enough of this, but I got a Seinfeld reference for you to end the pod. 28 years ago tonight, October 10th, 1996, on Seinfeld, we discovered that Elaine Bennis, played by Julie Louis-Dreyfus, is a terrible dancer.
Moshe, a lot of people were comparing that the infamous break dancer at the Olympics.
Yeah, the Australian break dancer. Yeah.
But I appreciate the Seinfeld reference, so thank you for that.
Thumbs out. There are very few people who are as terrible a dancer as Elaine Bennis is in Seinfeld. And so one of the more famous, iconic episodes there from Seinfeld.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for listening to the Mo News Podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Stay safe. We'll have coverage all day of Hurricane Milton and the aftermath there over on our Instagram account.